A single mother with a big heart.
If you needed anything, she was always there.
She was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
Is the victim of a bizarre murder.
Duct tape had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
Leaving her young son as the only witness.
A 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away, his mother being killed.
Investigators focus on the men in her life.
This guy, he wouldn't look at us. He was more nervous than normal.
And that polygraph test, he passed. It was frustrating as hell.
She was using Norma's house for these sexual liaisons.
To unveil a killer hiding in plain sight.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch.
People didn't see that inner demon. He was an unexpected killer.
It just blows you away.
Port Hueneme, California, a peaceful beach town on the Pacific coast.
It's a hidden gem. Port Hueneme is about 60 miles north of LA. It's a completely different environment. It's a lot more relaxed.
It's a quiet town, and it's a town that has, for a long time, a ridiculously low crime rate and very rarely a homicide.
But the tranquility of the seaside community is shattered one summer morning when police get an urgent call.
On June 1st, 1993, it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, our dispatch received a call of a possible homicide.
An ex-husband had called up and said that his ex-wife had been murdered.
We hadn't had a homicide in over 3 years. It took me a second to realize, okay, this is real.
Detectives arrive to begin the investigation, but nothing can prepare them for the scene inside.
I got inside the house, and then it was like, oh my God. This is just too bizarre for words. She's laying on the floor, head encased in duct tape. It had been partially cut away, but it appeared as though someone had tried to wrap her like a mummy.
It went from the top of her forehead to the chin.
It was just incredibly strange. This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
And some rigor mortis had set in the back portion of her body because she was laying on the back. Usually rigor mortis takes a number of hours to show up. We estimated that the victim probably died in the early morning hours. When I saw that duct tape, the first thing that entered my mind was this was somebody she knew. Whoever did it didn't want to have her look at them while they were committing the crime.
Looking to unravel the mystery of this bizarre murder, detectives turn to the victim's ex-husband, who claims to have discovered the body.
At the house, the ex-husband was there, his brother was there, and 2 younger sons were there.
The ex-husband, Tony, identifies the victim as 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez, mother to 2 boys, Andrew, 11 years old, and Austin, 4 years old.
Tony, he said that he had come over to the house to pick up the kids to take them to school, which was his regular practice.
The 2 boys were still asleep in their beds. When Tony realized what had happened to their mother, he told them to stay in their room until police arrived.
Tony, his brother Hector, and the 2 sons were transported to the Port Hueneme Police Department, where they were going to be interviewed separately. Tony and Hector were first at the house, and we needed to determine what happened.
Police continue to comb through the house looking for clues.
It was not a scene of extreme violence. There wasn't blood anywhere. There weren't a lot of things overturned.
In the bedroom, we located her purse, and it was intact. There wasn't anything that seemed to be missing.
This was not like a burglary that had gone wrong.
There's no sign of forced entry into the home. Then, something else catches the detective's eye.
I noticed a set of keys that were on the floor. They were in an unusual location, close to her body. We checked and confirmed they were Norma's house keys.
But why were Norma's keys lying next to her body? As investigators finish processing the scene, Norma's sister, Aralia, arrives.
I was supposed to pick her up because we were going to go looking for a car for her. And I had been calling her and calling her. And I drove to her house. That's when I saw the yellow tape. I saw the police department there, and that's what they told me would happen. And my worst nightmares, did I ever think that this would happen to my sister? It is horrible, horrible.
Norma Rodriguez was born and raised in rural Texas.
We're 7 sisters and 1 brother. She was the middle child, and, I was really close to Norma. She was very quiet, very reserved, a very big heart. If you needed anything, she was always there.
I first met Norma in 1975 in junior high school. We were 14 years old, and we became friends right away. Well, we used to hang out together and just go everywhere together. She could be feisty, but she was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
After high school, Norma moved to Oxnard, California for college and soon fell for another student named Tony.
She loved him. She just loved being with him.
Their college romance became more serious, and 2 years later, in 1982, Tony popped the question. They soon had their first son, Andrew, and their second son, Austin, arrived 7 years later.
She was just a great mom. Norma was very devoted to her boys. Her boys were her life.
But in 1991, after almost 10 years together, Tony and Norma's marriage became strained.
Tony was really never around.
She was getting into arguments and fights with Tony, asking him to provide for them. She realized it would be an easier life for her if she just went on her own without Tony. And that's what she did.
Later that year, Norma moved with her sons to the neighboring town of Port Hueneme. She got a job at a local retail store and started a new chapter in her life.
Being a single mom, people might think that's a hard job. She enjoyed it. And it was hard for her, but she was happy.
Who would want to take the life of this loving mother, and in such a bizarre way? Later that day, at police headquarters, detectives began to interview Norma's ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez, and his brother, Hector.
As the first 2 parties to the scene, the investigators had to look at them.
The detectives asked Tony about how he found Norma earlier that day.
Tony, he said that he had knocked on the door, but Norma didn't answer. Sons, Andrew and Austin, were asleep. The door was locked, so then he used a credit card in order to slip the lock, and he was able to open the front door.
When Tony and Hector entered the living room, they saw Norma lying on the floor, her face wrapped in duct tape.
Hector told us that he cut the tape because they didn't know whether she was deceased or not, and they wanted to try to make it easier for her to breathe. He's the one that had the scissors in his possession, and he's the one that decided to cut the tape off of her face.
We thought, wow, that's a little strange. Why is this guy doing this? Why is he messing up our evidence? Hector told us that the body was still somewhat warm. And that didn't make sense because by that time she had full rigor mortis. I mean, she had obviously been deceased for a number of hours. I just wasn't buying it.
Investigators are skeptical. Is Hector misleading police because the 2 men have something to hide? They hone in on Tony and Hector as possible suspects.
We don't know these people. We don't know what they're capable of.
Tony and Hector are suspicious. And Tony, being Norma's ex, he was right at the top of our list.
Coming up, detectives broaden their hunt for a possible killer.
We've got countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, interviews with co-workers.
We didn't know who it was. I just wanted him off the streets.
Investigators suspect a love interest from Norma's past has something to hide.
It was a brief but intense relationship.
It was that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life.
And what police uncover shocks everyone.
All this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
Mother of two, Norma Rodriguez, has been found murdered with her head wrapped in duct tape. Less than 24 hours into the investigation, detectives are interviewing their first suspect, starting with her ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez.
In a case like this, statistics will show you that an overwhelming amount of the time, it's going to be that significant other or former significant other who ends up being your suspect.
Investigators ask Tony about his relationship with Norma in the weeks leading up to her death.
At the time, Tony said that they had been separated for a couple of years. I don't believe they had filed for divorce yet, but they were living separately, and Tony had visitation rights. They weren't close friends anymore, but they tried to maintain the friendship for the boys.
But police have a different account from Norma's family.
We learned that shortly before the homicide, there were some conflicts.
Norma, she was upset at the fact that he would come make excuses to come over with the boys, but he would end up wanting to stay there. She used to complain about that. I said, don't let him in. He doesn't have the right to come into your house. And she was a little timid when it came down to Tony.
According to loved ones, Tony couldn't accept that Norma was moving on. Detectives press him about his whereabouts in the hours surrounding Norma's murder.
Tony said that on May the 30th, early afternoon, he talked with Norma and asked if our son Andrew could stay with him. Tony had tickets to an Angels game the next day, and so they agreed that that was okay.
Tony says Andrew was dropped back home the next night. At the time, Tony never entered the house. He found Norma's body the next day. Did Norma's ex innocently walk into the crime scene that morning, or had something more sinister happened?
The potential motive with him was he wanted the kids. Maybe one thing led to another, and he lost control.
In a room nearby, police questioned Tony's brother, Hector, since he was with him when Norma's body was found. They asked where he and Tony went after dropping Norma's son at his mom's.
Hector, he said that they had been at his residence with other family members in the city of Oxnard. And when we interviewed those family members, they corroborated what Tony and Hector told us.
Knowing their alibis are far from concrete, detectives asked Tony and Hector to take polygraph tests.
The results of the tests were that they were being honest in stating that they did not know anything about the homicide.
With no hard evidence to hold them, investigators are forced to let the two men go. News of Norma's death quickly spreads through the small community.
When I found out about her being murdered like that, I had told my cousin that I had just talked to her. It can't be true because I just talked to her. It was true.
At the police station, detectives received the results of the autopsy.
The cause of death was established as manual strangulation. Norma wasn't a tiny woman. Whoever did this had to possess significant upper body strength.
Some important details emerge about the duct tape.
The length of it was approximately 20 feet and had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
The duct tape was examined, and there were skin cells that were discovered. But in 1993, DNA technology was in its infancy. You had to have a fairly significant sample size in order to potentially get a result from it. In Norma's case, they didn't have nearly enough in these samples.
To find out who did this, we have to dig deeper.
Searching for new leads, detectives hope Norma's 11-year-old son, Andrew, can help. With Tony's consent, the detectives talk with him at the station.
When you're interviewing any type of a witness, it's a difficult process, and you have to understand that. When you're interviewing a child is extremely difficult. We interviewed Andrew, and we just wanted to try to get as much information as we could. From the date of the homicide, Andrew had gone to a baseball game with his father and his uncle. Later at night, Andrew was dropped off at the house, and the house was dark.
Andrew walked up to the front door, found it was locked. He went around to his bedroom, saw that the window was open, and crawled in.
Then, Andrew shares a disturbing detail told to him by his younger brother.
When Andrew came into the bedroom, 4-year-old Austin had said, "Mommy has a Band-Aid on her face." That didn't register immediately with Andrew, and so he went to bed. And it wasn't until morning that Andrew found out exactly what Austin meant by a Band-Aid. It just ripped at your heart knowing that a 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away from his mother being killed. And at one point he had come out, he had seen his mother's body. That just ripped at me a lot.
What else had Norma's youngest son, Austin, seen? Detectives decide to speak to the 4-year-old.
At first, he was withdrawn. He really didn't want to talk about it, which was understandable. I knew that because he's 4 years old, and I couldn't have gone on much longer than I did. And I knew that I needed to stop. But then he mentioned a man by the name of Corey.
He brought up the name Corey as someone who was over at the house at that time. Now we've got this person who might end up being our prime suspect.
But who was Corey? Had he killed Norma? Did the single mom's youngest son just solve her murder?
We've got to run it down as far as it goes.
Police are investigating the bizarre murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez. Her youngest son, Austin, says he saw a man named Corey at their home around the time of the murder.
At that time, we had no idea who Corey was, but it was something that had to be checked out.
Detectives learn from the family that Corey could be Corey Davis, one of Norma's co-workers. So they head to her workplace.
First step was find out, to what extent Corey knew Norma, if they socialized, if they were friends away from work, and so forth.
Corey was more nervous than normal. In talking with him, he wouldn't look at us. He kept staring down, not tuning in or paying attention.
Corey's unusual behavior during their conversation alarms investigators.
He did not like being talked to and having to answer anything.
They question Corey about his relationship with Norma.
He stated that he would interact with Norma at work, but they weren't that close with each other, and they didn't have any interactions beyond that.
Detectives want to know if he was at Norma's house near the time of her murder, as young Austin claimed.
He made it pretty clear that he wasn't at the house at that time. Instead, he said the night of the homicide, he was at home. The only people who were there at home with him were his parents. We needed to find out how much of what he was telling us was, provably true.
While officers are sent to check Corey's alibi, detectives speak to Norma's other coworkers, starting with her friend, Beatrice.
Beatrice came to Norma's house on Sunday, the day before the homicide. Norma had a get-together, a small barbecue at her house for several of her co-workers.
Police ask Beatrice if she remembers anything unusual about the day of the barbecue.
Beatrice said that while she was there, suddenly Norma can't find her keys anymore. And they ended up searching all over Norma's house, trying to figure out what happened to Norma's keys.
They didn't find them, and then they're laying beside her body, beside her house at the time she's found. We figured someone had taken her keys, and that's how they were able to enter the house.
It's a significant lead. Does this mean the killer stole the keys at Norma's barbecue? Detectives renew their focus on her inner circle.
From everything we knew, this was a pretty personal crime. We had a certain confidence that the killer knew Norma.
At the police station, investigators discover information they received from Corey Davis has some holes.
One of the things we do with everyone is we find out what their addresses are, their date of birth, everything else. And with Corey Davis, one of the things we noticed was that his address he gave us was not the address where he was actually living. So there was a discrepancy there.
Why would Corey withhold that information from detectives? They wonder what else he's hiding.
But at this point in time, Corey jumped out at us as this is the one we need to concentrate on.
Police bring Corey in for an interview, but he's far from helpful.
He's like, well, I don't want to be involved in this. Well, I understand that, but like it or not, you are part of this case. If you want to be eliminated from the suspect pool, the best way to do that is to cooperate with us.
Detectives share details of the crime with Corey to observe his reaction.
With the information that we were giving to him, he was obviously upset, and he took it really hard.
Corey denies any involvement in Norma's death. They ask him to take a polygraph test.
He submitted to the test, and he passed.
All detectives have tying Corey to the crime scene is a statement from Norma's 4-year-old son. But police know he could be mistaken, given his young age and traumatic experience.
At that point, Corey worked his way down the ladder of possible suspects dramatically.
1 week into the investigation, detectives are out of leads. They look at who else was at Norma's barbecue the day before she was killed. Friends tell them about a former coworker named Warren Mackey.
Warren Mackey was a previous co-worker of Norma's, and also he lived in fairly close proximity to her.
Warren and Norma hit it off and became friends.
They worked together for a while, and the work relationship became a social relationship. And it appeared that Warren had something more than just a friendship interest in Norma.
I remember Norma telling me that there was a guy there that she used to work with, and he was always trying to talk to her and trying to ask her out.
Talking to Norma's coworkers, detectives learned that Warren pursued Norma, but she wasn't interested in him romantically.
Norma told Beatrice and some of the other people that she felt that Warren wanted more than to be friends, and that she wasn't interested in that. She tried to curtail any attempts that he may have made to ask her out. Some of the employees that we talked with felt that Warren wasn't real pleased with that. He liked Norma, and that he wanted the relationship a little bit more than what it was.
But Norma still tried to maintain their friendship.
She noticed he was kind of like an outcast, just very private. So she tried to include him in the group. She didn't want to leave him out.
As detectives look closer at the quiet coworker, the information they uncover is concerning.
Started picking up little details about him at that point. There were some people who said, yeah, good guy, he was okay to work with. But, there were enough people who pointed out that he was a little weird and had made some overtures to Norma, enough to make us want to look into this a little further.
But did Warren's workplace crush make him a killer?
The nature of the relationship was of interest to us. We're going to have a conversation with Warren Mackey.
Police investigating the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez are questioning her former coworker, Warren Mackey. Detectives have learned that Warren may have been more than a doting colleague. They're trying to determine if he's connected to this brutal crime.
In our first encounter with Warren Mackey, there was nothing that seemed overtly suspicious or evasive or anything about him.
Detectives ask Warren about his feelings for Norma.
The impression that Warren Mackey gave us was that, his relationship with Norma Rodriguez was pretty casual. They didn't see quite as much of each other because they were no longer working with each other, but they socialized a lot.
Warren said that they were close, but it was only a close friendship. He never had romantic feelings for Norma.
He had tried to present himself to Norma as someone to lean on, someone to talk to. I'm here for you.
But investigators aren't fully buying it.
We felt that Warren liked Norma and that he wanted to make the relationship closer than it already was.
Then, Warren reveals a detail that grabs investigators' attention.
He had helped out Norma with, a couple little things around the house. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the kids had a small basketball hoop and it had somehow gotten broken and that he had fixed it. And what really kind of set off an alarm was the fact that he had fixed it with duct tape.
This is the first time in the investigation that anybody's mentioned duct tape or someone possessing duct tape.
Detectives drilled down on when Warren last saw Norma.
Warren said that he had been in the presence of Norma at the barbecue the day before the homicide. By the time things had wrapped up for the evening, it was essentially just him and Norma there, and they had just kicked back and watched TV for a while. This made him one of the last people who could have or would have seen Norma alive.
Had the former coworker made advances on Norma, then attacked her when she turned him down? Detectives asked where Warren was on the night of the murder.
Warren said that on May the 31st, close to Norma's homicide, he and his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend, they went to a nightclub in Santa Barbara till about 1:30, and then they came back to where they were living at in Oxnard. They talked for a short while, and then everybody went to bed. We drove to Oxnard, and we ended up talking with his roommate and her girlfriend who had gone with him for the night, and they corroborated his story as far as them going to Santa Barbara, closing the nightclub, and then getting back probably between 1:30 and 2 in the morning.
Could Warren have had time to drive to Port Hueneme and kill Norma after arriving home from a late night out with friends? Warren agrees to take a polygraph.
And he passed it, stating that he knew nothing about the homicide and he knew no one who would have killed her.
With nothing concrete tying him to the crime, police let Warren go. But before he leaves, Warren remembers Norma had problems with a man she was dating almost a year ago, named Daniel Garcia.
As the investigation continued, we started interviewing a number of people about Daniel. We found out that Daniel Garcia was Norma's boyfriend for a short period of time.
They met at a party. Norma had a strong attraction to the charming mechanic.
It was a brief but intense relationship, lasted a few months.
She told me about Daniel, that she really cared about him a lot. They would do fun things together, and she always had a good time with him.
Friends tell police Daniel ended the relationship, blindsiding Norma.
Daniel had approached Norma and essentially told her that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. But Norma was affected quite a bit by the breakup.
Then, detectives learned that the relationship was turbulent.
There was some fraying in the relationship, and there were some conflicts. That sends up some big red flags. There was one coworker who mentioned that they had witnessed a fairly heated argument between Norma and Daniel.
Daniel came in while she was working. For whatever reason it started, they had a verbal altercation that were witnessed by other people. It shows there was hostile feelings on the part of Daniel Garcia.
When detectives dig deeper into Daniel and Norma's relationship, they learn he visited Norma at home about 2 weeks before her murder.
Norma confided to her close friend she was involved with him before her death.
With a history of conflict in the relationship, did an argument turn deadly?
And this is big. Any big fight that went on, that was problematic.
Detectives are closing in on their new suspect.
This could be our guy. We have to find out if he could have committed this crime.
The investigation into the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez is heating up. Police have a new suspect in their sights, an ex-boyfriend, Daniel Garcia.
One of the things that we learned about the relationship between Daniel and Norma was that there were some conflicts. That sends up some red flags.
Daniel agrees to come to the police station for questioning.
Norma really had no confrontations. She was very mild-mannered. The fact that she was getting into verbal altercations was unusual.
When detectives ask Daniel about his relationship with Norma, he denies any problems.
Daniel said that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. And so they broke up and went their separate ways. But they were still able to be somewhat friends, and he would stop by on occasion.
Detectives confront him about the heated argument with Norma at her workplace almost a year earlier.
At the time, Norma learned that he had had other relationships, and it was a problem. She was pretty upset by that.
She still had feelings for Daniel.
Had Norma attempted to restart their relationship, but instead wound up in a fight that spiraled out of control.
During his interview, Daniel told us that he saw Norma but didn't have an argument.
Detectives asked Daniel where he was the night Norma was killed.
He stated that he was at home with other family members watching TV, and then he went to bed. We talked with other family members, and that alibi was corroborated. But family members will lie for other family members. Sometimes they won't be perfectly honest with what they know, and it's extremely difficult to put weight on that.
Like previous suspects, Daniel is subjected to a polygraph.
And he passed.
With no evidence connecting the ex-lover to the crime, police let him go. It's another disappointing dead end.
After a couple of weeks of going through this, talking to countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, neighborhood canvasses, interviews with co-workers, polygraph examinations, it was frustrating as hell.
That was really, really hard on my family. We did not have an answer to who killed Norma. I just wanted not only justice for Norma, I was very concerned for any woman out there. We didn't know who it was. It could be someone that just passed me by. I didn't know. I just wanted him off the streets.
1 month into the investigation, the pressure continues to mount on police to solve the case.
We would get calls from the media every day. Every place we went in the community, they would ask us what was going on, you know, and it was a lot of pressure.
Then, a surprising development. Norma's family contacts police with new information about Beatrice, Norma's coworker and friend.
It turns out that Beatrice was having an affair, and she was using Norma's house as a location for these sexual liaisons. Norma knew about it and, in fact, condoned it and gave her a copy of her house key.
But why hadn't Beatrice disclosed this detail to police earlier?
We confronted Beatrice with this information. Initially, huge wave of embarrassment. But she laid it out on the line. She told us, you know, the when, the how many times.
Detectives question whether the secret rendezvous led to Norma's murder.
Now we've got other people who had, you know, either continued access to the house. Previously, they were on the periphery of this case. Now they've moved right to the center of it.
One person detectives immediately turn to is Beatrice's husband, who also knew Norma. Had he gone after Norma for helping his wife have a secret affair?
And now, suddenly, Beatrice's husband, he's potentially in the suspect pool. We have to find out if he has an alibi and if we can corroborate it.
He apparently didn't know his wife was having an extramarital affair in Norma's house.
That was not the most comfortable thing to do from an investigative standpoint, but it still had to be done. And, you know, the guy was crushed. He was absolutely crushed.
Detectives question Beatrice's husband about his whereabouts on the night of Norma's murder.
He told us that he had been at work late that evening. We talked to a lot of his coworkers. Everything about this man was genuine.
6 months into the investigation of the murder of Norma Rodriguez, detectives worry the trail has gone cold.
We're no closer to narrowing it down than we were on day one.
This case was very mind-boggling. You build up things that, wow, this is going to be great, it's coming together, and then it falls apart. As time progressed, the lead started falling off. It was tough. It was really tough.
Months turn to years. For nearly a decade, the case is at a standstill. But Norma's family doesn't give up.
Every year, we would call the police department for any updates, any new leads or anything. We kept it active. We didn't want this case forgotten.
During this entire investigation, I had the picture of Norma Rodriguez on my desk. I swore to her that I would never give up trying to find out who was responsible.
Then, 10 years to the day Norma was killed. An astonishing break in the case.
Worker with a crime lab. He had a lot of the evidence that we secured in the Norma homicide. He called me and he says, we have a match. We have a match on the DNA.
My head just like exploded with 1,000 thoughts. It was just nuts.
I remember receiving the phone call and it was like winning the lottery.
It's been 10 years since 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez was found in her home, strangled and wrapped in duct tape. The case has remained unsolved, with all leads turning out to be dead ends, until now. With advancements in DNA technology, evidence collected a decade ago has finally yielded results.
At the time of the autopsy of Norma Rodriguez, there were a number of samples that were taken: hair samples, blood samples, and fingernail clippings.
The crime lab said we have a match on the DNA, and it comes back to Warren Mackey.
Warren, Norma's friend and former coworker who had previously passed a polygraph and had an alibi for the night of the murder. At the time of the investigation, Warren had submitted his DNA and was cooperative.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch. It just blows you away.
Investigators start putting the pieces together about Warren Mackey.
If you're dealing with someone who's a true sociopath, polygraph test. So now I'm thinking, all this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
We just went into high gear. We started unraveling everything again and doing what we needed to do.
Detectives start building a case based on forensics.
They evaluated DNA that we had gotten off of Norma's body, and we found Warren's DNA under Norma's fingernails.
The DNA evidence is a major breakthrough, but to build an airtight case, they want more.
The single biggest piece of physical evidence we had at the time was the duct tape. So it got sent off and it got tested.
The DNA that was obtained within the multiple layers of the duct tape was returned to Warren Mackey.
The odds of the DNA match being from someone else besides Warren Mackey was 1 in 810 billion. So we felt pretty confident that this was our person.
Investigators pieced together the events that led up to Norma's murder.
I think this was the classic case of a jilted suitor. And my guess is that he just got a flat-out rejection. He built up his expectations to a point where he couldn't take the fall.
Investigators believe in the early hours of May 31st, Warren Mackey entered Norma's home using keys he had stolen from her purse at the barbecue the day before.
According to Norma's son, Andrew, the house was dark. Many times she would fall asleep watching TV. Maybe she fell asleep on the couch. She had no idea what was about to happen.
Detectives believe that's when Warren strangled Norma.
In his mind, she needed to die because she shouldn't have rejected him.
Then Warren wrapped her head in duct tape.
Trying to depersonalize the scene and covered her face so that he wouldn't see it.
And he ripped that duct tape, handling both ends of the duct tape, wrapped it completely around her face, and left.
Police also believe Norma's 4-year-old son, Austin, was in the next room, not realizing his mother had been murdered.
Austin didn't process, because he was a very small child, that he was too young to process what had happened. An absolute nightmare.
After Warren kills Norma, he returns to his place in nearby Oxnard, as if nothing happened.
I believe that Warren Mackey was the type of person who felt that if I can't have her, nobody can. I think this was one sick individual who had no value for life. He had no right to do what he did.
On August 28, 2003, Ventura County investigators arrest Warren Mackey for the first-degree murder of Norma Rodriguez. Warren pleads not guilty.
During the subsequent 10 years, Warren had settled down. He had gotten married, had a job, was living a very stable life. His friends, neighbors said that he was a nice, caring man.
And for him to live 10 years after that and not even have any remorse, that is not human. I can't imagine what is in a person's head to even hurt another human in that way.
Then, on January 10, 2005, as investigators prepare for trial, the DA receives an unexpected call. Warren Mackey has changed his plea to guilty.
Warren Mackey is an unexpected killer because people didn't see that inner demon, that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life. People just didn't see him that way, but he was that way, and he is that way.
On March 28, 2005, Warren Mackey is sentenced to 15 years to life for the murder of Norma Rodriguez.
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was such an elation. You felt like this weight being lifted.
At the end of the day, we achieved closure for the family. but there's never going to be complete closure.
The devastating loss of the vibrant single mother will forever be felt by her loved ones.
I think about Norma a lot. She was having a good life, and he took it away from her.
It still hurts like it happened yesterday. I miss her in my life. That wound does not heal. We just put it in the back burner. We have to live for Norma, and we have to go forward.
Bring a nigga from the 9-1, switch that over, that's the young blonde. I was at the West Coast, now I'm in the East Coast.